I remember I came home from school one day and I had asked my stepfather what sex meant. And, as any normal father, they'd be kind of choked up and a little, how do I answer this? But not my stepdad. He ended up saying, why don't you come here so I can show you? And just as a second grader, you don't really comprehend what he meant by that. I mean, he was, a father figure to me. So I thought he wasn't, going to hurt me in any way. The abuse started by me watching porn. And over time, it led to having full-blown intercourse with me. And it lasted for a good 7 years until I was 14. And throughout that duration of the time, mental abuse and physical abuse came into play as well. Once the abuse started happening, my routine in school did change. There were a few incidents where I would I'd bring my Barbies to school and make them have sex in front of my friends, or steal money out of the cash register. And it's just, I was so out of character. So if my mother would have taken the classes, she would have noticed, like, this is not her. She doesn't not act like this. She's this way. So something has to be going on for her to act out this way. As well as my stepdad, whenever she suggested me to go with her to do something away from him, where he wanted that alone time, and he would just jump right off the bat and make an excuse, like, hey, no, like, come up with something. That would be another red flag that she would have been like, okay, something's weird about this. Oh, and then as I got older, he would start sleeping in my room. And this was when she was pregnant with my brother. And she did find out about it, but she didn't think anything of it. And because he told her it was because she was snoring so loud because she was pregnant. But I mean, come on, who sleeps with their 14-year-old daughter?
Well, I think that was one of my biggest fears once I had children, was someone kidnapping them. I don't know why, it was just, and I would have nightmares about that. So I was always thinking about some stranger, hurting them or kidnapping them or doing something to them. But I was never educated on, it's typically someone someone in your family or a friend, or just because they have access to your child much easier than a stranger does. When my daughter was 4, I was bathing her and her twin sister. And when I got them out of the bathtub to dry them off, I was drying her sister, and I noticed my daughter that had been abused was kind of masturbating, playing with herself. And I'd always heard, when kids do that, just to kind of ignore it. So I didn't think much of it. And then she said, this is what the perp does to me, and used his name. And I just completely flipped out, and I started screaming for her dad. And we had just been with the perpetrator. It was somewhat of a family member. It was the boyfriend of an aunt who actually lived next door to us. And my daughter went down there and played a lot because they had a son that was just 2 weeks older. And at age 4, there were people in the family that didn't believe her, and I could not believe that, because at age 4, they don't even know what they're saying. I mean, she just innocently said, this is what he does. Her aunt and this guy was down there, but her twin sister told me that she had urinated in the vent in their bedroom, and then there was another instance where she wiped feces on the wall in the bathroom, and I thought I was a horrible mother. I just thought, oh my gosh, what have I done to my child? Why is she exhibiting these behaviors? And I don't remember the span of time, but it wasn't that much longer after that she told me what had happened. Knowing now what a pedophile is, I probably would have been more intuitive and more sensitive to that if I would have understood that. I hadn't been explained about we were always taught stranger danger. I didn't know the piece about it's usually someone close to you that has access to the child. I never knew that until this. And I think if parents know that, you don't want to be paranoid, and you don't want to question everybody that comes in contact with your child, but you just need to be aware of their surroundings. And I also taught my children after that, if you get what we called the uh-oh feeling around someone, get away from them and come tell someone you trust. So I think that was the biggest thing. I just, now that I know, he was very creepy. He was but no one liked him in the family, so I was the one that befriended him because I felt bad for him. So.
Our son was sexually molested by a male cousin who was 5 years older than him, from the time he was 8 until he was 13. And we had no idea, looking back, I'll get to that later, but we had no idea that this was happening in his life, nor would we have suspected it. We felt like we did everything we could. We married later. I'm an early childhood educator. Went through the Happy Bear thing, talked about safe touches, talked about if anyone ever touches you, make sure you tell someone. It's never, we did all of that, and it still happened. And so that's my greatest pain, my deepest regret, I struggle with that I'm his mother, and how could that have happened? And it did. So that forgiveness has been really hard for me, but so he didn't disclose until he was a freshman in high school that an incident happened. And knowing what I know about children, I knew not to press it. And so we started seeking some counseling for him. And then it just kind of fizzled, maybe. And then we saw some risky behaviors coming out as he was in high school, drinking, marijuana, blurting out in class. We really thought when we first started seeing some of the behaviors, negative attention-seeking behaviors, getting in trouble with a teacher, that kind of started around 4th or 5th grade, which now we know that at that time, that was happening in his life, and we didn't know. So we just thought it was ADD, or we had him tested and all of those things. So looking back now, really his behaviors, his out-of-control behaviors, his impulsivity, his almost lack of care for other people. There was a real disconnect with friendships that we didn't understand. And so anyway, fast forward to high school, some of those behaviors came out. He was suicidal a couple different times. His friends came to us and said, we're worried about him. But they didn't really give us any more information. So it just kind of unraveled. And I remember the conversation. We were in our bedroom and we were saying, what is going on? Why are you, doing this? And I said this, remember I said, it's like you have a hole in your soul. Like there's just something, do you have anything you need to tell us about? And he just kind of, at that moment, he then said, what I told you before that happened, I didn't tell you all of it. And so we listened and we affirmed that he was safe to tell us, that we believed him, it wasn't his fault, all of those things. And then, probing a little bit more, he opened up a little bit more just about the violent nature. There was some choking him to where he passed out. There were some knife marks on his back that his cousin would threaten him by. And I found out this later. We never saw any of that. He kept his back covered and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, his behaviors really signaled to us. And then when he disclosed, and we realized the depth of his pain and the depth of the abuse was more than just one time. And so together we said, we need to call the police. And we did. And we called my brother-in-law, my sister, and he were going through a divorce at the time. And we said, this is what he reported to us. We believe him. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to call the police and we're going to file a police report. And we just want you to know that. And that was a hard call to make, but we just really felt like we needed to do that because we had more information that really kind of started explaining some of those risky behaviors. And it just so happens that my brother-in-law called my nephew that night, and he happened to be babysitting, a 23-year-old, babysitting a 4 and a 6-year-old, his boss's children. And at that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, if there's anything we've got to, I just felt responsible, that, not so much responsible, but very scared for those children that were in his care that night, and there was nothing I could do about it, and it was just kind of a whirlwind of feelings. The other thing, I asked my son the other day, our son, why didn't you tell? You know, we've always talked about nobody should touch your body under your swimming suit, and if anybody touches you, come tell. I mean, we had all of this instruction. He went to Happy Bear. We talked about it. So we were very open about those things from him being very little on. And then our girls that came, 2 years later, we always had very open conversations about nobody should touch you, and we were very careful about who kept them, and, I would never have thought it would happen to us because we had all those things in place, and it did happen. And so when asked, why didn't you tell? And he told me that it was out of pure fear. And if we can all think about being an 8-year-old and having someone choke you to where you pass out, or put a knife on your back, and to have that kind of violence right then and there at 8 years old. And he told him, if you tell, I'll do it to your sisters. And so here's an 8-year-old boy who's, oh no, I don't want that to happen to my sister, so I will never tell. And he said the power of that violence against him and the threats, and he also told him nobody will believe you. It's the classic perpetrator script. That's why I know that our son wasn't the first victim. I don't know how many victims there were, but he had it down pat, and it worked.